Good morning, Unafrelich and Purim. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Maisres Pei Gimel Halacha Dalet. We're learning today Daf Lamed, and we left off on Daf Chav Tes Amid Beis, 3 lines before the bottom of the Amid, when the Gemara is referring back to the Mishnah, Allah L'Reisha, which is speaking about someone who's standing on the treetop. Doesn't have to be the top mamish, but on the treetop of a fig tree, and how that is not considered to be in the domain of the chutzner, and therefore, even if the Mishnah says we're to gather many figs together, there's no problem because it's a gemar malacha, but you don't have re'iyas pnei chutzner. The Gemara is going to begin today by asking what were to happen if a fig fell off the tree by itself. Could it be taken up and eaten on the treetop? Of course, eating one is never a problem, but eating it, like the Mishnah says, by gathering it together with other figs. And that's going to be l'chu'ura perhaps linked to a machlekes that we had on Daf Chav Beis, as we'll see when we will learn the Gemara. And me'inyan le'inyan, speaking about someone, the Mishnah basically is saying that one who is on the tree, on the treetop, that person is not considered to be standing in the chutzner. We're going to inquire whether that same will apply when it comes to the laws of shikha. Now, I know that we're not learning now about shikha. We learned it in the past. We learned it in Masechtas Peah. One of the big rules that we learned over there is that shikha never takes effect when the owner is away from the field. This is a very important rule. We're going to remind ourselves of it with more detail, but just at least in brief in the intro, that even though when the worker was hired to gather the sheaves, if the worker is the one that forgot one or two, that l'chu'ura is the din of shikha, and it is. But if the owner is off the field, even though whether the owner forgot or not is irrelevant, shikha is only relevant if it happened by the person who's gathering the sheaves, whether it's the owner, whether it's someone who he or she hired. Nevertheless, there is a halacha that the owner has to be on the field for the shikha of the worker to take effect. The question will be, what were to happen if the owner is on a tree in the field? Will we apply the same logic that we have in our Mishnah, that the tree is in the chutzner is not considered in the chutzner? The same would be if we're going to make that correlation that a tree in the field is not considered to be in the field. And the consequence then would be that even if the worker had shikha, the owner was not in the field, then it will be, it won't take, and it won't take effect. We will also be speaking a lot about the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says a halacha that seems to imply that whenever one begins to consume beheter, they are allowed to complete its consumption. Rabbi Eliezer, we already quoted, is a Masechta Trumos, but regarding our din of Maisres, that if someone had a cluster of grapes and the person is not merchandising it, which means you are allowed to snack from it before you have re'iyas pnei habayis. So Rabbi Eliezer says, if you begin to eat that cluster outside the chutzner, outside the bayis, and you continue to eat it as you walk into the chutzner or bayis, you can continue. Same thing Rabbi Eliezer says, if someone begins to eat food out of Shabbos, even though Shabbos is echad mihashisha devarim that are kevei ala maisres, since you began eating that item, you can continue eating it. Rabbi Eliezer says that if a kohen is eating truma, and while he's chewing on the truma, he becomes tamei, Rabbi Eliezer says he doesn't have to spit it out. It might all be because of one rule. It might not be. But what might it be? That Rabbi Eliezer subscribes to a principle that once you begin doing something beheter, that action you can continue, even though the circumstances changes. The Gemara will give another understanding in Rabbi Eliezer, as we will see inside. We're going to have a brisa that's going to put together, that's going to speak a lot about how does one undo a chutzner. Don't forget, the iyas penei chutzner is only because chutzner duma debayis. What happens if someone has a front yard, a backyard, and they change its designation? They turn it into a pardes. They plant it. They fill it up with items. They no longer use it as people would use a chutzner, which is really an extension of the home. At what point do we say it's no longer a chutzner? So we're going to learn many brises about it. The Gemara is going to put all of these brises together, mamish like a puzzle. And finally, we're going to go back to the rule in the Mishnah that spoke about a tree, that the trunk is in the yard, but the branches are outside the chutzner. Or the opposite, the trunk is outside the chutzner, but the branches go into the chutzner. And when we learned the Mishnah, we explained the Mishnah as one of the options we'll have today in the Gemara. that there we only care about where the picker is standing. That will be one way of understanding the Mishnah. And we're going to learn another way of understanding the Mishnah, that it has nothing to do with the picker. It only has to do with the branch, as we will see inside. This will be Daf Lamed. Chavre, let's hit it. Daf Chavtes Amid Beis. Again, 3 lines from the top of the Amid. When the Mishnah states, Allah L'Reisha, that once you are not on, your feet are not on the ground of the Chatzar, you can gather many figs together. So asks the Gemara, what were to happen is Galgala Me'eleam, if a fig fell on its own off the tree down onto the yard, so there's a fig laying on the ground, Mahu Machzarta, are you allowed to pick it up? Meaning, if you now want to go to the top of the tree, we're not speaking about a fig that you picked. That's something else. Fig fell by itself. You are on the treetop. You are allowed to eat many figs together. You're eating and you're looking on the ground and you're seeing on the ground a fig. Are you allowed to go and retrieve that fig? On one hand, you can argue that that the fig already hit the chatzar. Once this fig hit the chatzar, true, achas, you can eat. But the moment you're going to take it to the treetop and you're going to gather it with another fig, everyone according to their opinion, or whether you're going to have 2 figs in the same hand, or whether you're going to have 4 figs in the same hand, according to what we just learned, then you're going to have tzeiruf. Or are we going to say that since you never picked this fig, or since it never went into the chutzner, b'mezit, only b'shoigeg, it fell down, doesn't matter that it was in the chutzner, it never entered the chutzner, and you can join it with other figs. That's the Gemara's question. So the Gemara attempts to answer that Kama de Teimar Taman, we're going back to a Braisa that we had on Daf Chav Beis on our pagination. There, the Braisa was speaking about someone who accidentally brought something into a house, never intended to do it, realized, I have this produce in the house. So de facto, there was an iyas pnei abayis, but it was never intentionally. This is not even you taking it through the yard. Taking it through the yard means that you had intention to take it through the yard. It wasn't meant to remain there permanently. That was one machlokes, Rabbi and Rabbi Yossi. We're not talking about that. Here we're going even more. You never b'chlal had kavanah to bring it into the house. So just like we learned in the Braisa above, that taking it mistakenly into the house or the yard is of no consequence. You can't eat it there, but you can take it out. So l'cha'oida, here also, machziran l'mekayim v'eichel. So the same thing would be over here, that if a fig fell down, you can take it to the treetop and you can eat it casually. Let's compare one case to the other. Right, look inside the last marafolda. That the last 3 lines. If a person erroneously, accidentally took it into the house, so this is according to all of the Tanoim. Even though you can't eat it in the house, but you can remove it from the house, and it's not considered to be an item that had the iyas pnei abayis and v'oichlan. So hachinami, you should be allowed to take it back onto the treetop. Now we're beginning on.
What if there's more than one? What if there's a bunch of them? Same thing?
The same thing.
Yeah.
Maybe not. We'll see in a moment. Very good, Kevin. Very good. So the Gemara says that it's not an agulus. It doesn't follow the same logic. Taman, over there, when you took it back outside the house or outside the yard, you brought it back b'makayim. That's completely putter. Interestingly, even though when you read the Mishnah, it sounds like the treetop is considered a domain for itself, argues the Gemara, no, it's not. A treetop is not completely separated from the chutzner. True, it's independent regarding the attached figs. But here, the fig was detached. But Amhacha, since bringing it back to the treetop, and the tree is on the chutzner, it's not as much as a removal as we had on Daf Chav Beis. Maybe we can view it as you are machzirin l'makim chiyuv, and therefore maybe you will not be allowed to make tzeiruf. The Gemara is not saying that it's certainly that way, but the Gemara is saying that do not correlate our question with the Braisa we had on Daf Chav Beis. However, the Gemara does say, well, I got it. To what could we compare the Braisa on Daf Chav Beis? That if the person was standing b'rosh hate'ena, and you pick the fig while you are in the treetop, and now the fig fell down, or now you walk down for a moment without knowing you have one fig on you. This is taka going to be the same, because here you picked it outside the chutzner, you brought it into the chutzner b'shoigeg, now you brought it back. You're right. In that case, you will be allowed to do tzeduf. The question that the Gemara was wondering is that if the fig fell on its own, and you see what happened over here is big difference. If I pick it on the treetop, there wasn't riyas b'nei chutzner. I brought it into the chutzner b'shoigeg. Here, it fell into the chutzner. Now, we're not saying that it's vaday a problem, but what we are saying is that you cannot compare the case of the inquiry where it fell on its own. That's something that remains unanswered, and don't bring me a conclusion from the Brais on Daf Chav Beis.
Rabbi,
okay. Yes.
If it fell on its own, is that more logical to lean on the side of saying that it's permissible, or the opposite?
No, I would say the opposite. That's more that can open up a possibility that it's prohibited. See, when I picked it on the treetop, don't forget, we kept on mentioning, it's all about the moment of picking. I picked it. Here, it wasn't picked yet. But on the other hand, it fell into the chutzner. You can look at it in two different ways. Yesh v'yesh. Maybe, Danny, either it's even more lenient or it's more chamor. That's the better way of wording it. But it's not the case we had above. The only thing that will be the same, like the Gemara says, if I picked it on the treetop, that will be like me picking it in the field. I brought it into the chutzner b'shoigeg. Either it fell or I went down off the tree without knowing that I have a fig in my pocket. Then I will be allowed to go back on the tree and combine it with others. Eating that one, b'chlal, is not a problem. Even in the chutzner I can have. Okay. Bottom line is, even though the Gemara just said that the treetop is not a completely separated area, I got that, but it is a separated area. Bottom line is, the Mishnah says, if I'm on the fig tree, I can gather many figs and eat them, because I'm not mamish in the chutzner. So now we want to know, how would we, if we would apply this law when it comes to the din of shikha? So just quickly reminding ourselves that when either the owner or the one who's doing the work, not the owner, but doing the work on behalf of the owner, is gathering the sheaves from the field, if the person forgets one or two, with all of the pratim, as we learned in Masechtas Peah, right, you have your back towards it, it's already out of your hand reach. For you to get it, you would not only have to turn around, you would have to take a step. At some point, the Torah says that must be left for the poor. Okay. Yet there is an interesting halacha, and that is that when do we say that even the forgetfulness of the poil affects the din, the status of shikha, if the owner was in the field? Whether the owner forgot or not doesn't make a difference. Remember this. I remember learning this. But the owner has to be basada. If the owner is not in the field, if the owner is in the city, then even though the worker forgot, there won't be a din of shikha. So the Gemara ultimately is coming to ask the question, what would happen if the owner is in the tree? Based on our Mishnah, you can say, your owner is in the tree is not the field. Or we can say, we just said it. I got it. The fig tree is not mamish chutzner, but it's also not completely a separated area. It's not a completely separated area. So therefore, we're going to remain with an unresolved inquiry. But let's read it inside. Ma at Ovid law, how will you judge someone, the owner, standing on the treetop? Do we say that will be like the owner is standing in the city, as the Gemara is going to speak out what we just said, or is it like the owner standing in the field? And Yeva Kahada. Yeva Kahada means let's remind ourselves, let's bring back a Braisa that makes this differentiation. And the Braisa says that if an owner is standing bo'ir, the worker is working in the field, even if va'amad, and the owner says, the owner, this is just an example, the owner has left a sheaf in a specific place for whatever reason. He hid, for whatever his purpose was, and then the workers are doing the gathering today. They're not going to find that. I know that that sheaf is going to be forgotten. Not only did he know that, but the Taka forgot it. Now, if you were to say that the owner's knowing that there is a sheaf prevents shikha from happening, the owner knew, right? The owner knew. So therefore, what would you say, Aviv? He knew. He didn't forget. The Braisa says, Eino shikha. When you learn the Braisa, it's like learning Chumash and Rashi. You can make a big mistake by thinking that the reason why it's not shikha, it's only because the owner remembered. The owner says, Ich weiß, and it's there. He forgot, I didn't. But that's not the way we learned the Braisa. Who reminds us is the Rashirilio. Look inside the last line in the right column. Eino shikha. Meaning, afilu chazarush kache balabayis, even if the owner also forgot. The owner said in the morning, oh my God, I forgot to tell him to pick it up. He's going to forget it. Even if the owner forgot it while he was gathering. Why? The Sfirole, look inside the Rashirilio, the top left column, the dafke basada, there's a rule. It's based on a pasuk. Only when the owner is standing in the sada, is it shaykh to have the whole law of shikha by the worker. Avol mishabab alabais leir ein shikhasoy nor the shikchas payalem midei. There's no din of shikha. In reverse, says the Braisa, back in the Braisa, if the owner is standing in the field, and he says, oh, I know the workers are going to forget a certain sheaf or two. I know it because I hid it for whatever reason. I know they're going to forget. And they forgot. And the owner didn't. The owner remembered the whole time. The din is at shikha. Why is it shikha? Because the only person that we care about is the one doing the work. Eloma, you have this tanai, that in order for the din of shikha, b'chlal, to apply, the owner has to be in the field. That's what the Braisa is teaching you. Once the owner is in the field, he's in the field either because he's doing the work, or because he has an office in the field, or because he's taking a walk in his field. If he's in his field, anywhere in the field, then the rule the Braisa says is that we don't need for both of them to forget. You know who needs to forget for there to be the din of shikha? The one doing the work. And this is based on a pasuk that basada, that in that pasuk, the word basada is superfluous, v'shachachta. And from there, Chazal learned only when the owner is basada, then is the forgetfulness of the worker, which is either the owner being the worker or a hired work is shikha. But v'loi ba'ir, but not when the owner is outside the field. The example we are giving is basada. Then there is no din of shikha, even if both of them forget. Okay. So now that we established, we reviewed this rule. So now the Gemara in Yerushalmi is just very brief. But the Bavli would have spoken out a lot. So now the question will be, what will happen if the owner is in a tree in the field? Do we say he's on the branch? That's not in the field. So therefore, the shikha of the poil doesn't do anything. Or do we say, no, he's not bo'ir? We don't view the fig tree or any tree as to be completely separated from. We don't view it that way. He's enough basadeh for us to say that if there was shikha, there the shikha. That's the Gemara's inquiry without having a resolution. Yes, Avi.
So the rule is that for shikha to happen, the owner has to be in the field.
Yes.
With the workers.
Yes.
So if he's in the city, then it's never going to be
never going to be shikha, whether he remembered or not. And if he's in the field, his remembering or not is irrelevant if he's not doing the work.
Question, Rabbi.
Not a logic. That's a
something else. Is it why don't we compare the top of a tree to a rooftop, which is its own domain?
I think a rooftop is definitely a complete domain legamre. I think if the balabas would be on a rooftop, on a building, inside the field, the Gemara would not even inquire. Vadai no shikha. I think a tree is less than a rooftop. It's enough, not chatzir, for you to get away with eating a few together. But that's what the Gemara is trying to point out. It's not gag and
Right.
tree is the same. It's not. Okay.
Thank you.
Now let's go back to the rule. This is something that we began learning yesterday. The machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon. We're going to focus now on Shitas Rabbi Tarfon, which is when we mentioned that even though when you pick something that is growing in the chutzner, you do have re'iyas pnei chutzner. The Mishnah was machadesh that if you don't have gemar malacha, and the gemar malacha is not the way gemar malacha happens in the field, a basket, a pile, a bundle. No, 2 or more. If it's 2 or more, gemar malacha, and it comes, gita v'yoda boim ka'achas, and you have right away the riyas pnei chutzner, and therefore you can't snack. If you don't have gemar that there is riyas pnei chutzner, you can snack. What's snacking? So that we had a machlokes. Rabbi Tarfon was the one that said that you can eat an entire cluster. One cluster, even though a cluster can have, 30 grapes, 50 grapes, 2 grapes, whatever. You can have a whole pomegranate. You can have a whole melon. And that was Rab Tarfon. And Rabbi Akiva is the one that said, no. You can only have 1 grape at a time. You can only have 1 little kernel of the, 1 seed of the pomegranate at a time. You can only take a slice of the melon when the melon is still attached at a time. If you take the whole thing, that's called gathering. That was the machlokes. So says the Gemara that let's see if we can make a correlation between our Rabbi Tarfon here and the Rabbi Eliezer that we learned in Masechta Trumos that we just quoted a few daf ago, which is over there we learned in Masechtas Trumos. We learned in a Mishnah, if a person is eating a cluster of what? Of untithed grapes. Why are you allowed to eat it in that Mishnah? Because it did not yet have Re'iyas Pnei Habayis / Re'iyas Pnei Chatzir. But the person is going from the Gina. The Gina is not a Chatzir. The Gina is outside the Chatzir. You entered into the Chatzir. So Rabbi Eliezer has a Chiddush. Rabbi Eliezer says, since you already began eating the cluster, you are allowed to finish eating that cluster without tithing it, even though there is a Re'iyas Pnei Chatzir. The simple way of learning Rabbi Eliezer, which is what we learned on Trumas, which is what we learned when we learned it just a few days ago, which will be challenged today later in the daf, but the pshat of Rabbi Eliezer is based on let's go with this rule, that he holds. Once you began consuming something, beheter, you are allowed to finish its consumption. And I'm going to say by heart right now, and if that is the logic, that would mean that Rabbi Eliezer's opinion in the following din, which is that if a kohen is eating truma when he's tahor, the truma is tahira, everything is good. And while the kohen is eating the truma, while he's chewing it, the kohen becomes tamei. Rabbi Eliezer says he can swallow it. If the logic behind Rabbi Eliezer is the way we said it, then everything will be following the same rule. Since he began eating it beheter, he was tahir when he began, and the food was tahira when he began, he can finish eating it. That will be one way of understanding Rabbi Eliezer. We'll get back to that. Now, not everyone agrees with Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Shua, can't finish it. Let's go back to this case. You brought it into the chatzar. Sorry, there's an iyas pnei chatzar. Okay. And one more. There's one more machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua over there in Trumos. When you began to eat something before Shabbos came in. When we learned it, we spoke about that normally you're not allowed to eat before Shabbos comes in. But the way you did, Purim fell on Friday, or Purim Mishulish, and you made a plate of smapa. Whenever you are having a meal, you began eating something that was untithed as a snack. So my example of Purim Mishulish is a bad example because then you're having a meal. But a snack you can have. You're having just a little bit to open up your appetite. And as you're eating, Shabbos comes in. Rabbi Eliezer says you can finish what you began. Same thing. Rabbi Yeshua says no. Shabbos is koivei l'maisres.
Talking about finishing. Does that mean just like swallowing what's in your mouth? Or we're talking about like finishing?
In the case over there is finishing the cluster.
And that's based on the opinion of Rav Tarfon, who says...
Well, that's what the Gemara is going to say right now. In other words, what finishing? You can't say I'm going to finish the whole bucket. I can't finish the whole tree.
Finishing means having one grape.
L'choira, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Tarfon are saying the same thing. But since Rabbi Tarfon says that you can have a whole cluster, he calls a whole cluster one. You can finish that one. According to Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Eliezer wouldn't be able to say it because then he would say you can finish eating that grape. Rabbi Eliezer says you can finish eating that cluster, they go together. That's the attempted correlation based on the understanding of Rabbi Eliezer that since you began beheter, you can finish it. Yeah, what were you saying?
Sorry, if you have tefillin on before Shabbat,
Oh,
can you finish davening with the tefillin on?
you can ask a
Since
better
you-
question. I think what happens if you have tefillin before every evening?
You have tefillin
Even
on.
though wearing tefillin at night is not the end of the world, but we do not wear
Would you
tefillin
have
at night, whether biblical or rabbinical.
Didn't the Rambam say if you're wearing it?
Can leave it on before you go to sleep. Yeah, very good. We just learned this. I remember a few years ago here across the street, either a tzaddik nisted or some very stubborn Jew that was mishich ma'yolamayla mikolam. I don't know how to describe it. And he came here, and he put on tefillin, stamina Wednesday, just tefillin, and he was davening with a lot of kavanah, like he was into his davening, and it got dark. To me, it didn't look good. I walked over to him and I told him, Rabbi, you have to take off your tefillin. He was very disturbed with me interrupting him. Very.
Wow.
Okay? That's why I remember that. Aviv, I don't know. I think he's one of those people that either he's a tzaddik nisted or he's someone who's mentally ill. One of the two. I don't know. It was a different type of person. And I remember debating. I was debating because I felt it doesn't look good. There were people there. I think there was a class that I was giving. It was late. It was late at night. And he wasn't making noise. He was mamish in his own world. Anyways, if I did wrong, I should apologize. That's sitting on me. Rab Ze'eda said in the name of Rabbi Chia b'shem Rabbi Yechanan. Oh, now ich will do sagen azoi. Oi, did Rabbi Tarfon ke Rabbi Eliezer, Danny, like you just said, which would mean that what? Rabbi Tarfon agrees with Rabbi Eliezer, who the way we are understanding it, that once you begin something permissible, you can finish eating it. So now let me say it like this, Danny. Let me go in the opposite direction. Maybe, hear what the Gemara is saying. Maybe that platform holds you can only eat one grape. You can only eat one grape. But since you began eating the one grape, now you can finish all the other grapes. No, it's not pshat that we're looking at the whole cluster like one. It doesn't have to be the way. That Rabbi Yechanan was saying, maybe not. Maybe Rab Tarfon also agrees that every grape is a separate item. And really, you can't have two. Here it's different, because since Rab Tarfon follows Rabbi Eliezer, what does Rabbi Eliezer say? Once you begin beheter, you can finish. You can only have one grape. But once you had one grape, you can finish it. Finish the whole cluster. Or it's even more, that Rab Tarfon avad uksa so eichel kitchilosei, that Rab Tarfon holds that the entire cluster is considered one. Not that you began, it's only one. Since it's only one, so it's therefore, I would say more, he's unrelated to Rabbi Eliezer. We don't know whether he holds like Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Tarfon holds that one cluster is one. Very good. Another variation of what Rabbi Tarfon said. It's similar, but not the same.
Like no.
Yeah, we don't know. A lot of in the Yerushalmi, we're not looking to know. We're just looking to see the different possibilities. Get used to that. We're not looking to know. We're looking to see how we don't know. Maybe it's this, maybe it's that. And we're happy with that. The Gemara moves on from that. Or Rabbi Ila says in the name of Rabbi Isi, in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, that Rabbi Yechanan had a doubt, but it's a little bit different. The first side is the same. That Oy Rab Tarfon ke Rabbi Eliezer, which would mean they both hold that really a cluster is not viewed as one entity. A cluster is just one grape. And therefore, theoretically, you should only be allowed to eat one grape. Elama, you have a new rule. Once you begin beheter, you can finish the whole cluster. Oy, Rabbi Tarfon avad achila sheyesh bo shtayim shalish achila is kachila achas. Or Rabbi Tarfon views a cluster as one, but here Rabbi Yechanan said words that make a nuance of a difference. Rabbi Yechanan said that a cluster that has in it 2 or 3, let's say, portions is considered one unit, which would mean that even according to Rabbi Tarfon, if you have a very big cluster, in which, when you want to finish the cluster, you don't do it in 2 or 3 bites. Let's say a person puts in their mouth, let's say 3 grapes at a time. 2 grapes, you have these little grapes. Maybe there are more than 9. Maybe it's more. Then even Rab Tarfon would be moided that you can't do it. It's the same inquiry, but the difference is whether Rab Tarfon in the second side will view any size cluster to be one or not. Or not. Maybe if a cluster is bigger than that, then it's not one. Then that in itself is an act of tzeduf. That in itself is an act of tzeduf. Very interesting. That's what you say. That's definitely one side, and not more. I'm just showing you, not more. That's what I just said. Okay. Now that we showed from Rabbi Yechanan that it's debatable whether Rab Tarfon holds like Rabbi Eliezer, now let's go into Rabbi Eliezer, Daf Lamed Amud Beis. Atkan, everything we said right now is based on the premise that the reason why Rabbi Eliezer says what he says two things. If you began eating it outside the chutzner and you entered the chutzner, you can continue eating it. If you began eating it before Shabbos and Shabbos comes, you can continue eating it. Why does he say it? Either, my Talmud Rabbi Eliezer, reason number one, because of Mishum Shehischel Beheter, like we mentioned. And if that will be the case, let me just say it by heart. So then the other din of Rabbi Eliezer, that's elsewhere, like we are mentioning by heart, that if a kohen who's tahor is eating truma, and while eating it, he has in his mouth truma, while he's chewing it, he becomes tamei. When Rabbi Eliezer says he can swallow it, that will follow the same. Since he began eating it, beheted, he's allowed to finish it. Or another way of understanding Rabbi Eliezer, Amar Rab Nosson, loy should Rabbi Eliezer oimer mishum sheyischol by beheter, elo should Rabbi Eliezer oimer yamten at sheyetze Shabbos or yat sheyoytzi chutz lachatzeder v'yigmor. This is not a blanket permit. It's not since you began beheter you can finish it. No. And more than that, don't think when you enter the chutzner, Rabbi Eliezer says you can eat it in the chutzner. You cannot eat it in the chutzner. That would be the case. It has nothing to do with Rabbi Tarfon, because Rabbi Tarfon is allowing you to eat the whole cluster in the chutzner. Rabbi Eliezer only holds that if you bring it into the chutzner, since you began eating it, the chutzner is not koiveya it to the point that even if you walk it out of the chutzner, you can't eat it. See, normally when we say the iyas panei bayis, you know how powerful that is? That if I take something into my home, even if I take it outside my home, I no longer can snack from it. So Rabbi Eliezer is saying there is a svara of kivin shehischel beheter, but it's very limited. Kivin shehischel beheter, if you walk out of your house, you can finish eating it. Not that he's saying that even when Shabbos comes in, you can eat it on Shabbos. Of course not. But after Shabbos, you can go back to eating it because you began beheter. If that is what Rabbi Eliezer is saying, according to Rab Nosson, then it has nothing to do with Rab Tarfon. Because again, Rab Tarfon is allowing you to take a whole cluster and eat it in the chutzner. Beautiful. That's great. And from here, next piece of the Gemara is going to be addressing how does one undo the status of a chutzner. I have a chutzner. I'm changing its designation. Just to make it clear, we just said Gino. You know, a person can use that piece of land not to live in there, but to, to plant the legumes, to plant the vegetables, to plant trees. We'll see trees is not like legumes. Is there a certain point where it's no longer a chutzner, which would mean that from now on, when you bring something in it, there's no re'iyas b'nei chutzner. So says the Gemara, Tani, we learned a braisa in the name of the Tana Rab Nechemya, that chutzner shehi nederes, once a chutzner is plowed. Why do you plow a chutzner? You plow to plant legumes, to plant grain, right? Then, hadehi kegina, the moment you did the act of plowing, oichlin betoicha arai, gavaldik, which means even if it is protected, even if it's still private, every time a lishi tasoi, doesn't make a difference. It's no longer a chutzner, but your mental change of designation is irrelevant. What is needed is an action, and the action that will do it, your talus is over there inside the left side, then plowing. Amar Rab Simloi, you should know that halacha kirab nechemya. Tony, we learned in a brayso that zara ruba, you don't have to plow the whole thing, even if you only planted, even if you only sowed. I'm sorry. The roiv, it's no longer residential. No one will use their chutzner beruba to have in it planted vegetables or legumes. But that's only when it comes to grain, vegetables, or legumes. But if in your yard you planted trees, look at here in LA, the backyards, the front yards, trees are different. Trees, depending how they're planted, the Gemara is going to add that. Trees actually could enhance a chutzner. People use their chutzner. Their homes were much smaller than the homes today. People literally extended their personal living space into the yard. When you have shade, it's more gishmak. When there's a good fragrance, it's more geshmak. So not aruba. No, you're still chayeves is the girsa. Even imagine even if the majority of it got filled with trees, you will not lose the chutzner designation. So says Rab Chizda, hold on a second. Not any type of planting of the trees doesn't contradict the chutzner. For hu shenatol lenoya shel chutzner. Only if these trees are beautifying the chutzner. The simplest pshat of beautifying the chutzner is that the trees were planted in an organized fashion. If a person plants the trees the way a yeshiva bacher would do it, so even though it's the same thing, same tree, same apple, doesn't look nice. And ask your wife, maybe you can live in there. No, when a living quarter has to be aesthetically pretty. Okay.
All right. Does a chutzner require an eruv?
Chutzner require an eruv if two people own the chutzner. If the chutzner is halachically enclosed and carrying from the chutzner to the chutzner is not a problem, but carrying from the chutzner into the house, if the chutzner belongs to two or more and the house only belongs to one, even to one, for that you'll need an eruv chatzeres.
Thank you.
Now, says the Gemara, we had these two braises. The Gemara is going to put it together like a puzzle. Zajac the Gemara that hado yalfa min ahi, v'ahi yalfa min hado. Each one will add its halacha into the other one. Meaning, when we learned in the braisa that zara ruba, that the moment you sowed the majority of a chatzir, that rendered it no chatzir, and therefore from now on, produce that went into that yard will be ptura, you will be allowed to snack. So says Gemara beautifully, you know when that's true? Only if prior to plowing it, prior to planting it, you plowed it. We began, right? That you have to plow it. That was Rab Nachem, you're right? Why is that? Because if you did not plow it in advance, Aviv, one can view the sowing as a one-off. And if I, as an experiment, I'm trying to plant, doesn't take it out of the status of chutzner. Plowing makes it more intentional. Even though you can argue, maybe the guy's only plowing once, doesn't matter. But for this once. So the plowing is a requisite, even though the Braisa didn't say it. And the same thing in the other direction. That what? That when the Braisa speaks about the roiv, the Braisa that spoke about plowing never mentioned the word roiv, never mentioned that word. So now one teaches the other. So when we learned in the Braisa that if your chutzner was plowed over, and the Braisa says the words, oh, now it's a sada, which means now it's no longer a chutzner. So now we know what that means. It doesn't have to mean all of it, but it may not mean the minority of it. It must mean ruba. Beautiful. Okay. Weiter in the Mishnah. What was the next thing we learned in the Mishnah? Next thing we learned in the Mishnah was the case where you have the tree and the trunk in different domains. And actually the Mishnah went me'inyan le'inyan. We're going to continue tomorrow, right, to Ari Miklat, to Yerushalmi, to Ma'aser Sheni, to other dinim. Aviv had a great question that I'm going to share tomorrow. But before we get the first hour din of Maasros, the way we explain the Mishnah is only according to the first understanding today. We're going to introduce a new understanding. Let me just repeat what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah says, and Vlad was on me yesterday on this, that if, either way, let's go, that the trunk is in the chutzner, the branches, the Mishnah is speaking about a fig tree, but it's any tree. The branches are hanging to the gina, doesn't have to be a garden, outside the chutzner. Or the opposite, the trunk was in the gina, the branches in the chutzner. So the way I was teaching the Mishnah, which is a could be at least, so it could be that all we care is where the picker is standing. In other words, the reason why it doesn't matter, when it comes to the din of Ari Miklat, when it comes, let's say, to the din of Ma'aser Sheni in Yerushalayim, different. There we need to know what's the status. Here, it's not about the status of the tree. It's about vu bistu. If the picker is standing in the yard, even though the trunk is outside, but he picked it in the chutzner, the iyas pnei chutzner. That's the way we learned it. It could be that's the pshat. Or if the trunk is in the chutzner, doesn't matter that it's in the chutzner. We just said that when the fruit is attached to the chutzner, to the tree, we don't view it to be in the chutzner. We view the tree, that's the beginning of today's shir, to be an independent, semi-independent. When does it become an issue? When it's detached. If I am standing in the gina, so there was no iyas pnei chutzner. That would be one way of understanding it. So now the Gemara is going to tell you, okay, we're going to say that But there's another way of understanding it, and it's important to know that there can be a whole different understanding. So number one, says the Gemara, one way is Hon the Tamar Oichel Kedarkoi Upater. When the Mishnah says you can eat it, what is the Mishnah talking about? And or why? Why are you allowed to eat it? Because you, the picker, are standing in the gina. Of course, because you stand the closest to the fruits. If the branches, in this case, the trunk is in the chutzner, the branches in the gina, where will the picker stand normally? He could pick it from the chutzner, but that's the pshat, because he's standing in the gina. It's about the oimit, which would mean that when the Mishnah says hon the tamar, you can only eat one at a time. But if you are make tziduf, if you're going to be chayiv, why? That is referring to the case where the trunk is a take in the gina. So what? But the oimed, which is the picker, not just the stander, he's standing and picking it in the chutzner. So since he's oimed b'chutzner, so it's re'iyas pnei chutzner. Re'iyas pnei chutzner, the only heter for you to snack is if there is no gemar malacha, which is only oichal achas achas, say if you're going to be chayiv.
It's almost irrelevant.
That means, in other words, that's exactly the way we learn. I said these words. That's one side only. That's what really what the Mishnah is telling you. That we don't even. It's when it comes to maasros, it's not about what's the status. We don't care.
So what if the tree and the branches were in the?
Very good. Then he's saying good. And therefore, based on this, even if the tree and the branches are in the chutzner, and I stand in the gina, I have these. I have in my backyard. I have these sticks. You know those sticks, those pickers. I have a keli, and you take it. So you're the oimit. I mamish have it. I have avocados. I put them too high. It's amazing. You have that also, and you pick it, and it's amazing. For the first, I used it once, and I was yoitze. I bought it on Amazon. I think I paid $6 for that. Okay. At Khan, if the rationale behind this part of the Mishnah has to do with that we're not evaluating the status. Because like this, it's going to chop like this. Maasros doesn't even count. Then the Mishnah brought two different groups of halachas. In one, we only care about the ikr. We only care about the ikr. And the way we correctly learn the Mishnah. In the other ones, and I'm not going to repeat it right now, we care about both. Remember that? We go l'chumram both. Which would mean, Aviv, that the Mishnah never gave a scenario where all we care about is the branch. That we never had. That's only based on this understanding. However, Rabbi Yirmiyah is gavaldik. He's machadish. Rabbi Yirmiyah, ba'ah, kumi rab ze'era. Now, again, the word ba'ah doesn't mean he's asking. He's giving you a statement. He analyzed, and he came to this conclusion that no, even if Hoysan tell us bedukne, even if the fruit is taken by a pole, the Mishnah is actually going to tell you, Danny, that it's not about where you're standing, but for some reason, by maasros, all what counts is where the branch is. And if the branch is b'chatzir, even if you are picking it begina by a pole, you won't be allowed to do tziruf. So actually, the Mishnah is now going to give you three categories. Why before why is what? By maasros, that will be the only case of the Mishnah, according to the understanding of Rabbi Yirmiyah. How do we determine where the tree is? What's the status? Is it a tree of the chutzner? Is it a tree of the gina? Where are the branches? You know, when it comes to the avodah of a Baal Tshuva or a tzaddik, or when it comes to how am I inside versus what am I doing, for sure, the trunk is who am I, and the branches is what I'm doing. So this idea that no matter how rotten I am still inside, as long as I'm doing the right thing, is good. So it's what counts are the branches, are where your fruits are. That would be the salvation of the Baal Tshuva. In the Bavli, we would have that kibishitas reish lakish. And Rabbi Yochanan will say, "No, what are you talking about? It has to do with you, where you're standing, or where the ikr is." It's amazing. It's even more amazing that the Mishnah refers to the trunk as the ikr. And the branches are our children, same thing. So Kevan, me and you have hope because we have great kids. I'm saying certain things in life, we are judged by the branches. The branches is an offshoot. The branches might have been viewed as something external. And nevertheless, yes, it's not about the picker, it's about the branch. From Maisres, where is the branch? If the branch is b'chatzir, even if you're picking it with a stick from the gina, according to Rabbi Yirmiyah, you won't be allowed to snack of it if you did seiruf. Why? Because you picked a fig that grew in a chatzir. And I'll tell you more than that. When you use the pole for one instant, where was the fruit? Fruit was b'chatzir. If the branch is in the chatzir, where was the fruit?
According to that,
Beautiful.
you see that a fruit that's hanging out of the chutzner, right? But the trunk is in the
Same thing. It only counts the branch.
right. But you're saying, but didn't it originate in the chutzner?
I will say that. No, Danny. I know what you're saying, but let me say it like this: if the branch is in the gino, and I pick it when I'm standing in the chutzner with a pole with this picker, even though when I picked it, where was the fruit? Begino. But now I brought it to me. No one is going to say on this side that I can do tzeiruf. Because if everything was outside, but I brought it in, I can't eat it. But we're going in the opposite direction. Here we're saying that if I'm standing in the gina and the branch is in the chutzner, according to the first understanding, if I use the stick, then I will be allowed to. That's exactly what I have, Kevin. Then I will be allowed to have more than one. I can do tziruf because I'm the oimed is begina. According to Rabbi Yirmiyah, no. Even though I'm in the gina, it went to the chatzir first. Now it went in too late. Once it was in the chatzir, you can't just take it out of the chatzir. Unless, Rabbi Eliezer, unless you began